Good morning. Today's daf is daf Kaf Vav in one second, is it Kaf Vav? In Mesechus Menachot. We are at the Mishnah at the top of, yes, we're at the top of Kaf Vav Amud Aleph, and so let's take a look, and I'll share my screen and we'll get started. The Mishnah continues to discuss things that can potentially go wrong with a mincha offering. Of course, we're in Maseches Menachot. So the Mishnah continues a debate from Psachim over whether one can burn the sacrificial parts of an offering if its edible meat becomes tameh, burned or lost. So in Psachim, that's talking about meat. Here, we're now going to analogize it to the mincha. And what are the relevant pieces? So the throwing of the blood is comparable to the burning of the kamitza, of the komets, excuse me, and the eating of the meat is comparable to the eating of the remnants of the mincha offering, what's left after you take the komets. After you do the kamitza. And so as a result, now let's take a look and we'll see exactly how that lines up. So nitma'u shireha, nisfruhu shireha, abdu shireha, if the remnants became tameh or got burned or got lost, kamidas Rabbi Eliezer kshera, in the measuring of Rabbi Eliezer, in the estimation I would maybe use of Rabbi Eliezer, it would be kosher, as Rashi tells us, second line on Kavav Amud Aleph from the top of the page. Kamidas Rabbi Eliezer, to Amar Bepera Ketzat, because he says in the chapter Ketzat Solon in Psachim Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, dam, that we will throw the blood aval pisha ein basar. Even though we have no meat, you can, meaning the meat is burned, destroyed, lost, whatever, tameh, you should still throw the blood. So, hachinami, so here too, komets will do the burning of the komets, aval pisha ein shirayim, even if there's nothing left over. So kshera, it's kosher lahaktir komets. It's all right to burn the komets, and so that is the position of Rabbi Eliezer. But it's not the total only position. Ukamidas Rabbi Yoshua psula. Rabbi Yoshua says no, it's pasul. Kamidas, and back into Rashi. Kamidas Rabbi Yoshua de Amar im ein basar ein dam. That if there's no meat, then there is no blood. And im ein dam ein basar. And just as similarly, just the way that if you don't throw the blood, you can never eat the meat. So too, if you don't have the meat, if there's no meat present, so then you're not going to be able to throw the blood. Okay, so that's the machlokes in our Mishnah. And so now Rav qualifies the Mishnah. And the question that we're going to have is his statement to be taken in its most literal form, or was he trying to say something else? So Amar Rav. So Rav says the following: nitmu kol shira. When it comes to becoming tameh, if that's talking about where it all became tameh, about mikza shira lo. If only some of it became tameh, so you have some non-tameh shirayim. So as a result, there's still some remnants left to be eaten. So then, presumably, the idea is that even Rabbi Yoshua would say that it's still kosher to bring the komets on the mizbeach and to burn the komets, and you'd still be able to eat the rest of the shirah. So kasal kadaitach. So it seems like nitma in of a visar of lo, that he's trying to be specific. Right? He says that this is true if only some of it became tameh, but maybe it would not be true if only some of it was lost or some of it was burned. After all, you could imagine the distinction, because if some of it becomes tameh, it does still all exist. But whereas if either some of it got burned or some of it got lost, it doesn't all exist. And so as a result, maybe that's the distinction that he's trying to make. But then my kasavar, what is he thinking? What is his logic? I kasavar shiyura milsahi. Because you know what? If he thinks that having a little bit left over is considered significant in the sense that you would still burn something, afilu avad b'sarov nami. Well, then even if you have a little bit left over of what is lost and what is burned, and ikasavar shiura lav milsahi, and if you tell me that having a little bit left over does not allow something to be burned, so nitma my taima. So what's the reasoning that if it's some only some of it became tame? Demaratza tzitz. Maybe it's because the maybe it would be because the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol that's on his forehead, it would and says Kodesh Lashem, it would say that we are going to accept the remnants that are is tameh, so we'll as a result treat all of the remnants as if they exist. But ihachi, if we're going to use the tzitz to effectively allow tameh shirayim to serve their purpose, kol shirahanami. Maybe even if all of the remnants were tameh, we should also allow it to serve its purpose, and thereby treat it as if it was all tahor. And therefore, our Mishnah should not have included nit me'ushira. That in that situation, we should say that the tzitz affects acceptance, and even if all of it were tameh, you would be allowed to burn the komets. And so that's the question. Why did Rav limit his statement to tameh? So la'olam kasavar shiura milsahi. So the answer that we're going to give is that really the leftovers are something significant. It does have meaning. And therefore, the nitma, v'huadin la'avodusarv. And the truth is that when he says tame, tuma, he's also including lost and burned. V'hai, well, so in second, v'hai de ka'amar nitma, well, what the guy said, Tame. So why are you deriving something else from that? No, Reishayu Nakat. He just took the first case of our Mishnah. And so as a result, it's true for all the cases of our Mishnah, but he's teaching it with respect to the first. And you know what? Kidetanya. There's a brisa that shows that this is the case. Namely, that we see that in fact Rabbi Yoshua would say that even if some is left over, it's all good and you're able to burn the underlying sacrifice or throw the blood in the case of the blood. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Kol Zvachim Shabbatorah, when it comes to all animal sacrifices in the Torah, Shinishtayer Mehen Kazayas Basar O Kazayas Caleb, as long as you have an olive's volume of either the meat that is going to be eaten or the chalep, which is part of the emurim that is going to be burned, zorek esadam. Well, then you know what? You can throw the blood because you're going to be able to do something that is triggered through the throwing of the blood. However, kachatzi zayas basar, and that's the point. The point is that even if it's not all, as long as it's some, and even if it's not as long, it doesn't make a difference. This is a statement, irrespective of whether it got destroyed, got lost, became tameh. This is the statement. So kachatzi zayis basar v'kachatzi zayis chalev. But if you only had a half an olive worth of meat and a half olive worth of chalev, well then ein zorek es adam. You can't throw the blood because you don't combine what is eaten by man with what is eaten by the mizbeach, as we've seen several times throughout our learning of zvachim and menachos. Uva ola, however, when it comes to an ola where everything gets burned, so then the meat is just like the chaleb. Well, then afilu kachatzi zayis basar kachatzi zayis chaleb. Even if you have a half an olive's volume of meat and a half olive volume of chaleb, the non-kosher fats, you'd be able to burn it all on the mizbeach because you're going to Zorek Esadam, you're going to throw the blood. Kula Khalil, because it all gets burned on the altar. Mincha, and when it comes to the mincha, afilu kula kayemis lo yizer. Even if all of the mincha is left, you don't throw blood. Now, the Gemara is going to ask the obvious question because a mincha isn't an animal, and so what blood are we talking about when it comes to the mincha? But
That's the
that's not the
question.
reason we brought this. We brought this brisa for the first point, right? The first point was that Rav had said that as long as only some became tamei, you would still, even Rabbi Yoshua would say that you're still going to burn the komets, and whatever's left of the shirayim can be eaten. Or yeah, even irrespective of whether or not the rest of the shirayim is going to be eaten, you can at least burn the komets, and that's exactly like what you see in this brisa with respect to a regular korban, that we're going to allow you to burn, to throw the blood, even as long as one olive's worth of meat or one olive's worth of chalev is left. So now the Gemara asks, 1 second though, mincha maya. What service are you talking about where there's throwing of blood for a mincha? So Amar Papa, as we've seen previously, because we saw this brisa previously. Let's see, where did we last see it? We saw this brisa. See what it says. We saw this brisa in Zvachim two times. We saw it in Psachim. So I mean, it's a couple times. So we've seen this brisa a couple times through our journeys through Shas. But in any event, Rav Papa says, as he says elsewhere, minchas nesachim. We're talking about a minchas nesachim. That is the additional stuff that is added to a sacrifice, as detailed in the 15th chapter of Sefer Bamidbar. So where it says that you have to bring bring wine and mincha associated with certain sacrifices. And so the idea is the following. Salkadaitech, I might have thought that since as long as you have any of the sacrifice left, you would be able to throw the blood. So Hoel Ubahadi Zeva Kaasya, since these Nisachim, this Minchas Nisachim, is brought together with the animal offering, Kagufe Deziv Chadamya, maybe we should treat the Mincha as if it was part of the offering itself. And so as a result, as long as you have some of that offering left, the whole thing, the blood can be thrown. And so Kamash Malan, what this brisa is telling us is no, even if all of the mincha exists, if you don't have enough of the of either the chalev or the meat of the sacrifice, you're not going to be able to throw the blood. And so that's the story. You need to have meat or chalev, otherwise it's not going to be good. So Minah how do I know this? How do I know that you need to have some of the chalev left? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Matuba Mishum Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. And some say that it was in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Amar Kra, the Torah says, V'hiktir ha'chalev l'reach nichoach l'Hashem. You should burn the chalev as a pleasant aroma to Hashem. And that is said immediately after we say that you should throw the blood on the altar. So chalev va'afal pi she'ein basar. That shows that as long as there's chalev, even if there's no meat, you would still do it. Okay, va'ashkechan chalev yoseres ushtei klayos minalan. How do I know? The chalev is part of the emurim. It is not all of the emurim. So how do I know that any of the emurim, as long as you have an olive's volume, is sufficient for us to throw the blood? To katani u'b'mincha, when it comes to the we have a brisa that says u'b'mincha, when it comes to the mincha, afilu kula kayemes lo yizrok, right? When we said in that brisa that we just cited that even if you have all of the mincha, you're not going to throw the blood if you don't, if all the mincha is left, because you don't have enough of the other either the chalev or the meat. So mincha delo yizrok. It's only if you have the mincha left that you're not going to throw the blood. Hayosares ushtei klayos. The implication of that is that as long as you have any emurim, even if it's not the chalev emurim, even if it's the diaphragm and the two kidneys, so then Yisro will still throw the blood. So, Minalan. So, okay, I understand the implication from this, but how do I know it from the Torah? So I get the fact that it's required, but where do I see in the Torah? So Rabbi Yochanan Didei Amar, Rabbi Yochanan himself said, L'reyach nichoach. We said in the pasuk that we cited above, namely Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin pasuk vav, where it says V'ktir hachelev the reach nichoach laHashem. It didn't need to say the reach nichoach. So why is it telling us l'reach nichoach? Kol sha'atama alel l'reach nichoach. Anything that you burn in order to create the satisfying smell, so that is going to be sufficient to justify throwing the blood. So now, why do I need to reference chalev? Why not just say in that pasuk v'hiktir l'reach nichoach laHashem, and we would know everything? V'itzrich l'michtav chalev, v'itzrich l'michtav l'reach nichoach. Now the Gemara says, you need to have both of them written. De'i kasav chalev, because if we had only written chalev, hava amina chalev ein yoseres ushtei klayos. No, as we just saw, if we didn't have the concept of reach nichoach, we wouldn't have Rabbi Yochanan's teaching, and we wouldn't know that the diaphragm and the kidneys are okay that you can use. If you have an olive's volume of them, then you can still throw the blood of a sacrifice. So that's why Kasav Rachmana reach nichoach, we had to write reach nichoach in order to tell us that the throwing of the blood will happen even if you have an olive's volume of diaphragm and kidneys left. So what about the ikaz of Rachmana l'reach nichoach? Now, if you all had just reach nichoach, so that would certainly cover the chalev, but hava amina afilu mincha. I would have thought that even not only if you have none of the meat, and not only if you have none, and even if you have none of the emurim, as long as you have some of the mincha, meaning contrary to our brisa that we just cited, I would have thought that having the mincha alone would be sufficient for us to throw the blood. If you have the minchas nesachim left over associated with a korban, with an animal korban. So as a result, kasav rachmana chalev, so the Torah writes the word chalev in order to tell us that it's not enough to have the minchas nesachim left over. You need to have part of the animal. Even though the minchas nesachim is only coming because of the animal, you have to have part of the animal left. You have to have at least an olive volume of meat or an olive volume of emurim. Or if the meat if you're talking about a korban ola, where the meat is effectively a murim, well, then you can have an olive volume of everything, and that would be sufficient. But it all has to be of the animal. It cannot be from the minchas nesachim that comes with the animal. Okay. So,
and this must be with an ola. It can't be with shlomim. It can't be with.
No. We were talking about any kind of sacrifice. Remember, for the ola, that's where you need to have where the olive volume can come from both the meat and the chalev combined.
That's what I mean, right?
Oh, well, that you didn't say that. So okay, shelo b'chli sharis puzzle. So now the next Mishnah continues discussing the offerings for which all required procedures were not followed. So shelo b'chli sharis puzzle. If it's not in a kli sharis, it's puzzle. Now, what exactly does that mean? Thankfully, Rashi tells us. So take a look, first Rashi on the Mishnah, only Rashi on the Mishnah, Shelo Kiddush Kometz B'Kli Sharis. That, remember the process. We put the mixture into effectively a mixing bowl, and that is where you're going to stick your hand in and do the kometz. But after you do the kometz and you take after you do the kamitza and you take the kometz out, you take that kometz and you put it into a new kli sharis. And so what Rashi is telling us, that you never sanctified the kometz in its own kli sharis. The betchilas mincha, when it comes to the beginning of the mincha offering, when you have all of the dough in the vat or basin, so vaday lo pligi de boy kli. Everybody agrees that that needed to be in a kli shares because that is what effectively initially sanctified all of the dough for it to be part of the mincha. As we are going to see in the chapter Shtei Alechem on Daf Tzadik Vav Amud Aleph 96a, and then this is a quote from there. Shalu as Rebbe Zuminayan. How do I know this? So the bottom line is we'll find that out. We'll find that out. More details about that in I guess 90 minus 20 is 70, so about 2 months and a little bit. So we'll find that out in greater detail. But the bottom line is that we see that if according to the Tanakama, if it doesn't go into a Kli Shares, it is invalid. Rabbi Shimon machshir, and Rabbi Shimon says no, it is valid. Hiktir kumsa pamayim kshera. And then a second law says, you know what? If you burn the komets in 2 times. Now we're going to see what that effectively means is that you divided it in half and you burnt it half and then you burned the other half. But we'll see that at the end of the day today, I believe. So kshera, then it is kosher. So it is a valid sacrifice. So 3 explanations for Rabbi Shimon. First explanation by Rabbi Yehuda Brei de Rabbi Chia, who also poses the question. Amar Rabbi Chia Brei de Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Brei de Rabbi Chia. My time of the Rabbi Shimon. What's the Rabbi Shimon's logic for saying that it can be kosher even though it didn't go into that second base vessel? Amar Kra Kodesh Kodashim He Kachatas v'Kahasham. That when it comes to the mincha, this pasuk, which is Vayikra Perek Vav Pasuk Yud, is talking about a mincha offering, and it says that it's holy, it's very holy, just like a sin offering, the chatat, and the asham offering. And so why is it being compared to that? Bala Ovda Biyad. If you do the service with your hand, kechatas, like a chatas offering, so then you mean we can add that word back in because I mean that's what it's referring to. So ovda biyamin kechatas. Well, then you do the service with your right hand as you do with a sin offering, because take a look at the first Rashi on the Gemara. Bala avdecha biyad haktares komets. If you do the burning of a komets, shehi b'mokom zrika, which is in place of throwing of the blood, biyad, with your hand, meaning shelo kadshu b'kli, that you never sanctified it in a vessel. You took the komet, you did the kamitza, you took the komets, and you went straight to the mizbeach, and you put it directly onto the mizbeach. And so, if you do it by hand, what Rabbi Shimon is saying is that that's okay, because as long as you do it with your right hand, because then it needs to be like a sin offering. And just as a sin offering, which uses the finger of the right hand, so too you would need to use your right hand to do this. Bikli, you would need, but if you do it in a vessel, Ovda bismol kasham, well then you could do it with your left hand, and it's offering just like an asham. As Rashi tells us, kismol kasham, second to last narrow line on Kavav Amud Aleph, shizrika so bikli. When it comes to an asham, unlike a chatas, you can throw the blood using a vessel, the lo biyad, and not and you don't have to use your hand. De'ein lecha taon matana etzba, because the only time we have a placement with a finger is elachatas. Bilvad, only the sin offering. As we saw in Zvachim, all the way back on Kaf Daled on the bed of Zvachim, so a bunch of months ago, now probably about 4 months ago, Dil Rabbi Shimon Zrika Kshera. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's kosher to throw the blood in a case where you did it with your left hand. Titania, Zarek Bismol Puzzle, that we said, we had a brisa that says that you're not allowed to throw with your, if you throw with your left hand, it is invalid. But for Rabbi Shimon Machshir, Rabbi Shimon says it's kosher. Mishum de Bishar Zrikos Akarbonos Lo Ksiv Etzba. Because when it comes to the other forms of throwing the blood, when you're not talking about a sin offering, it doesn't use the word etzba. And Ella Kahuna, it just references that a Kohen needs to do it. And according to Rabbi Shimon, Villa Rabbi Shimon, Kahuna Baya Etzba. In order to teach you that you need your right hand, it can't just say Kahuna. It also needs to say Etzba. And so therefore, we're going to say that Rabbi Shimon would permit it in the left hand. So what is Rabbi Yehuda saying? He's saying that the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon is that when it comes to doing it by hand, if it's all by hand, it has to be done in the right hand, but it doesn't need to go back into a vessel that you're going a kli sharet before it goes onto the mizbeach. The kometz doesn't need to go into a kli sharet before it goes onto the mizbeach. All right, so that's explanation number one. And the key element of that explanation is that when you do it by hand and it doesn't go into the vessel, it needs to all be with the right hand. Rabbi Yanai Omar, Rabbi Yanai says no. Kaven should come to mikli shares because it's the kamitza is taken, the kometz is taken, the kamitza is done in a kli shares. So ma'aleyu umaktiru afilu behemyano. Then it doesn't matter what he uses in order to burn it and to take it to kometz to the mizbeach. He can even use his belt. He can even and that would be sufficient. Va'afilu b'mikida shel cheres, and even an earthenware fire pot. Meaning it doesn't make a difference what he uses. And so as a result, that's the second approach. We're going to say that that means that effectively you can even use your left hand. You don't have to use the right hand, even if you're doing it without putting it in a vessel. So that's the difference between Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to use the left hand, and the right hand, excuse me. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to use the right hand, and Rabbi Yanai says no, you can even use the left hand. Now we have a third approach. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Hakol Modim B'Komis Shatan Kiddush. No, you guys are misunderstanding our Mishnah. When it says that Rabbi Shimon says that it's valid even when you don't have a kli shares, that doesn't mean that it wasn't the kometz wasn't put in the kli shares. It means that the kometz wasn't kept in the kli shares. Meaning what? So here we have that hakomo and bekomesh shatan kiddush. That let's take a look in Rashi. Kol modim, second wide line on Kavav Manal. Kol modim bekomas shatan kiddush. V'chi mechasher Rabbi Shimon behikter, when Rabbi Shimon says that it's valid to burn it. She'im natlu mito kli shares. It's talking about when you had it in the kli shares and then you took it out of the kli shares la'achar shekidchubo, after you sanctified it in there, and then veheleyu biyado, and then you carry it to the top of the mizbeach with your hand, v'hiktiro, and now you burned it. Kasher. In that situation, it's kosher. So the point is that the first two steps of doing the kamitza and then putting the kometz into a kli shares, those have to happen. But once you have it in the kli shares, then from then on it doesn't have to go in the kli shares. That is what Rabbi Shimon means in our Mishnah. So we're going to ask 4 questions on this. First,
what does that mean? Once you have it in the kli sharet, it doesn't have to go in the kli sharet. What's that?
So once you had, again, you do the kamitza, you take your kometz, you put it in a new kli shares. Now that kometz needs to get brought to the mizbeach and burned on the mizbeach. Even though you now take it out of that kli shares and now bring it up without it being in a klisha race, that is okay according to Rav Nachman. It's the basically it's the last two steps of bringing it. Remember the four steps associated with a mincha. The four required steps are the kamitza, the putting it in a klisha race, the carrying it up to the mizbeach, and the burning it on the mizbeach. So those that the last two steps, what he's saying is they don't have to happen in a klisha race. The second step still has to happen in a klisha race, but the last two steps do not. So now we ask a question, and we're going to ask the first question on Rabbi Yehuda's first interpretation because it's going to seem like, remember, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to use your right hand, and this brisa seems to suggest that you could even use your left hand. So let's take a look. Meisvei, hekder chalavim ve'evarim ve'etzim. If you're burning fat or limbs or wood, ve'shehel on bein biyad bein b'kli, you can bring them up whether with your hand or with a utensil. Bein biyamin bein bismol, you can use your right hand or your left hand. Ksherim, and everything is still works and it's all valid. Hakometz v'akatoras v'alavona. But when it comes to the kometz and the incense and the lavona, shehel and bein biyad bein b'kli, again, you can bring them up whether with your hand or with your vessel. Bein biyamin bein bismol, and you can do so with your right hand or your left hand. Ksherim, and it's also kosher. So 1 second, to Yuvda the Rabbi Yehuda, break the Rabbi Chia. This seems to contradict Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda said that you needed to use your right hand, and here it seems to say that you can even use your left hand. So Amr Lach, Rabbi Yehuda, Brei de Rabbi Chia, Litzdad in Katani. No, it's two sides. There are two aspects of this rule. Biyad, biyamin. Bikli, bein biyamin, bein bismol. The way to read it is the following. Shehelan bein biyad, bein bikli means if you bring it up biyad, you have to use your right hand. But bein b'kli, if you use your vessel, bein b'yamin, bein b'smol, then you can use your right hand or your left hand. So as a result, he's effectively reread. Now, we are going to cite this brisa again today, and we're going to use it to justify the Rabbi Yanai's position. We'll see that in just a moment. But
how was Rabbi Yehuda holding a person that has is missing a right hand or a disfigurement of the right hand
he
or
wouldn't
is
be
a
able to do
stroke in
any
the
of
right
this.
hand?
He wouldn't be able to do any of this. We were talking about a Kohen that doesn't have a mum.
Uh-huh.
So there's that's not even applicable. That
Uh-huh.
whole category doesn't happen. Okay, so Tashma. So that was effort number one. Now we're going to spend the next three efforts challenging our third opinion, Rav Nachman, and in the end we are going to reject Rav Nachman. So let's take a look and see those challenges. So Tashma, we have another brisa that's going to show that this brisa is going to show that a second vessel seems like it's not necessary. And of course, again, remember, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that everybody agrees that the kometz needs to be put in a kli sharei. So let's see what he says. So kamatzo mikli, and then the Shita Mikubetza says kamatzo. Taking out the word shalo, kamatzo mikli shares. If you began everything fine, you took the kamitza out of, you did the kamitza from a kli shares. The kid show, and now you then sanctified that kometz, shalo b'kli shares, but you never put it in a kli sharet, meaning that you took the kometz and it went straight up to the altar, and it never went in a second kli sharet. V'helo v'hiktiru shalo b'kli sharet, and you take the next two steps and you bring it to the mizbeach and you burn it without a kli sharet. Pasol, it is invalid. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon makshimrim b'matan kli. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon saying, you know what? It's totally fine. Whatever vessel you use, it's totally fine. So again, that seems to say that even the second step of putting the kometz in the service vessel in the kli shares doesn't have to happen because you can put it in any kli. That's, remember, we saw it was you could put it in any kli, and so as a result, doesn't that contradict doesn't that contradict Rav Nachman? After all, Rav Nachman specifically says that it has to go in a kli shares. The kometz has to go in a kli shares. No, ema mimatan kli ve'elach. Nah, you could say that statement of Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon was not referring back to the Vikidcho Shalo B'Kli race, and that they're disagreeing with that also, but rather it's only on the last V'Ha'elu V'Hiktiro Shalo B'Kli race that they're commenting on, and so they're saying that those last two steps can be done without a Kli Shareis, and that would be exactly what Rav Nachman says. So that would be completely consistent. So Tashma, another challenge to Rav Nachman, again based on the fact that it seems that this brisa does not require a Kli Shareis. The Chachamim Omrim, and remember, he says that everyone agrees that a Kli Shareis is necessary. And we're going to see that again, there's an opinion that says that maybe not. Again, the rabbis say that you need a Kli Shareis. Ketzad, what do we mean by that? You have to take the Kamitza out of you do the Kamitza, from a Kli Shareis, umekadsho b'Kli Shareis, and then you have to sanctify the Kometz in a Kli Shareis, uma'alu maktiru b'Kli Shareis, and then you have to bring it up to the altar and throw it onto the Mizbeach with a Kli Shareis. Rabbi Shimon Omer, no. Kevan shekamatzo mikli shareis. Once you do the kamitza from a Kli Shareis, malo umaktiru shelo b'Kli Shareis v'dayo. It's sufficient. You don't need to bring it up and to burn it using a Kli Shareis. It's okay. You could use any kind of Kli. So again, we could say, doesn't that disagree with Reb Nachman? Because it seems like the second step of putting the Kometz in the Kli Shareis is not necessary according to Rabbi Shimon. No. Ema kaven shekamatzo v'kidsho b'Kli Shareis. Maybe what he means, remember, Rabbi Shimon in this brisa does not reference the makdisho b'Kli Shareis. He never mentions that step. So maybe he would agree with the Tanakam and the Chachamim and say that you have to do that step. And it's only referring to the bringing it up and burning it with a non-service vessel that is okay. And so that would be completely, again, consistent with Rav Nachman. So again, so Ema Kevan Shekamutso, Bekitchu, Bekli Shareis, Ma'alu Ve'ektiru V'dayo. In the situation where he did sanctify the Kometz in a Kli Shareis, then he could do everything else without a Kli Shareis. All right, so our final now challenge of Rav Nachman, Tashma, Kamatz bimino, v'nasam bismolo. If you took it with the kamitza with your right hand, and you did the kamitza with your right hand, and now you put that kometz in the left hand, yachzer limino, you have to bring it back to the right hand. Bismolo, if you kept it in your left hand, v'chishev eleha, and you thought improper thoughts, Bein chutz l'menkomo, whether you're thinking about burning it outside the right place, bein chutz l'zmano, or thinking about burning it outside the right time, puzzle ve'ein bo kares, or eating it in, again, it could be burning or eating outside the right time and place, puzzle, it's invalid, ve'ein bo kares. Even when you think about the wrong place, it's not going to have kares, because remember, and thereby, because it's not going to be pigul, because what do you need for pigul? You need everything else to go right. And if you have something that's wrong, and this person is holding the kometz in his left hand, so something is wrong, then the thinking doesn't work. So Bimino, if, however, he has these thoughts while the kometz is in his right hand, if you think about outside the right place, well, that's not pigul, that's just puzzle. So puzzle ve'ein bo kares. But if you think about the wrong time, pigul v'chayavin alav kares. Then not only is it pigul and therefore puzzle, but if you actually were to consume it, the shirayim, you would actually be subject to kares. Divri Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon. That's what Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon say. So v'chachamim omrim kevin shenesanu b'smol. Pasal salato mitanaso. That once you put the kometz in the person's left hand, it's in the wrong place. It can never be fixed. It's as if we'll see. Why my timer? Why is it so bad if it's in the left hand? Because what is the kometz like? The kometz is like the receiving of the blood. And the receiving of the blood, mishum debai kedushe bichli, you need sanctification in a vessel. The kaven shenisano lismol, as soon as you put it in your left hand, nase kedam shenishbach. It's as if as if like blood that's spilled, where it's spilled directly from the neck, mitzavar behema ala ritzba, from the neck of the animal onto the floor. And remember, if you catch blood in the kli and then it spills, you're allowed to scoop it all up and put it back in the kli. But if you never catch the blood in the kli and it goes directly from the neck onto the floor, there's nothing you can do about it. It's too late. It's already puzzle. And so as a result, it's like blood that spilled from the neck of the animal onto the floor, and then you gather it. Shepasul, it's puzzle. It's too late. So, but that's all the position. Remember, that last piece is the position of the Chachamim. But what did we see about Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon? Miklal, the Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, lobo matan kli. It's clear from this brisa that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Lazar do not require the putting it in a vessel. So to Yuvta to Rav Nachman, because remember, Rav Nachman said that everybody agrees that you need to put the komets into a kli shares. So to Yuvta, you're right, it is a tiyuvta. But one second, Rabbi Yehuda braid the Rabbi Chia Messiah. Maybe this is a proof to Rabbi Yehuda, because what did we see? Throughout this process, it needed to be in the guy's right hand. So what about Rabbi Yanai, Lema to have a tiyuvta? This brisa should be a tiyuvta for Rabbi Yanai? So no, it's not. I mean, yes, it contradicts Rabbi Yanai, but Rabbi Yanai would tell you the following. Amar lach Rabbi Yanai would say, Ana de Amri to Katana de Hekter. I'm like the Tana of the brisa that we quoted earlier. Remember that brisa where it said, Bain biyamin, Bain bismol? Oh, and remember, Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Chia, tried to break that brisa into two separate teachings. One's about by hand, then you need to use the right hand. But if it's with a vessel, then you could use your right hand or your left hand. But Rabbi Yanai would say to you, no, read that brisa the way it's written. The brisa is clear. Whether you use your hand or a vessel, you could use your right hand or your left hand. And so as a result, I am like that brisa, and everything is wonderful according to me. Don't try to divide it into two separate teachings. It's one teaching, and it's all consistent with me. Okay, so we end up with the two different versions. I apologize for not scrolling. Two different versions that two different answers that end up being sufficient, and so as a result, that is we have two different approaches. Either you can use your right hand or your left hand, according to Rabbi Yanai, or you have to use your right hand, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Chia. Okay, so we had the Mishnah ended by noting that a mincha remains valid if it is burned two times, meaning in two different parts. So
What was the tiyuvta the Rav Nachman again? It said tiyuvta Rav Nachman tiyuvta. I thought I.
Yeah, it was a tiyuvta of Rav Nachman. That's the third opinion. The third opinion said that everybody agrees that it has to go into a kli shares. And that Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah would say that even that the komets has to go into a kli shares. But the other two, and we've rejected that because it's clear from the last brisa that we cited that there's no need for a kli shares. According to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon. And so as a result, it's not a universal position, which is what Rabbi Nachman said it was. So as a result, Rabbi Nachman's position is knocked out.
At any point, there's not, but initially there has to be a cliche.
Everybody agrees. That was the Rashi at the very beginning of today's daf. Everybody agrees that the Kemitza has to be done in a klisha race.
But after that,
what happens to the komets, that's the debate. The Tanakama in our Mishnah says it needs to go in a klisha race. And the Chachamim, who are the Chachamim, that they needs to go in a klisha race. But Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon disagree and say it does not.
Right.
Okay. So hikter kumsa pamayim kshera. Again, if you burn the komets in two parts, it's going to be valid. So Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi pamayim v'lo pamei pamayim. You can do it twice, but you can't break it up more than that. You can't do double twice. four times. So, and really it means even three times. And we'll see why in a moment. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Pamayim, Vafilu Pame Pamayim. No, Rabbi Yochanan says, of course, you can do it as many times as you want. The whole point is as long as it all gets burnt, it's all fine. So, my Benayu, what's the difference between them? Amar Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Zera explains two concepts. Yesh kometz pachot mishnei zaysim. Can a kamitza be less than 2 olives in volume? Now, I will tell you, my hands are pretty small. It would pretty much be less than 2 olives volume if I were to do the kamitza. So, do we have that? And that's one point. V'yesh haktara pechusa mekazayis. And point two is, can you have a burning where you're burning less than a kazayas amounts? So Ika Benayu. That's the difference between them. That's what they're thinking. That is the difference. Again, the Mai Benayu often in the Gemara means what is the practical difference? The practical difference is obvious, is can you divide it more than two times? But here we're really asking what is the explanation that is underlying the difference between them, and what is it? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Saba, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, again, he thinks that you can do two times but not more. Ein komets pachos mishnei zaysim, that there is no komets that's less than 2 olives. And so when you break it in half, because the komets is more than 2 volumes, ipso facto, the half a komets is more than 1 olive in volume. And so as a result, the ein haktara pechusum kazayis. And so as a result, when you break it in half, which our Mishnah specifically allows, it's still good because it's still going to be larger than an olive's volume. So as a result, that's why it's fine. But if you break it into more than that, it's namely if you were to break it into more pieces, obviously it depends on the size of the person's hands, but the more pieces then you would, so that you end up with any piece that's less than a kazayas, it would not be valid. But Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Yesh komets pachos mishnei zayzim. There are kometses that are less than 2 kzesim. And so when our Mishnah says you can break it up, it means v'yesh haktara pechusam kazayas. You can break up things into smaller than a kazayas amounts and burn them on the altar, and it still all counts. And so as a result, you can break it into 2, you can break it into 4, you can break it into 24, whatever you want. You're going to be fine. So Itmar. So now we're going to end our today with 3 statements. I'm sorry. Sorry. So now we're going to end. The next thing is the precise moment that a mincha can be eaten. So
there's no portion that's too small. It can be infinitesimal as long
yes,
as
that's what it seems that Rabbi Yochanan would say.
You
Rabbi
can
Yochanan,
feel it or see it or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you remember, you can't. If you have it so small that you can't tell that something's missing, that would be a problem because you have to burn the whole thing, and if you don't burn the whole thing, then you have a problem, right? So that would be the caveat. But Itmar. So now again, komets me'emasai mater shirayim ba'achila. At what point does the komets enable us to eat what's left over? Rabbi Chanina Omer mishmashla bo esa'or. As soon as the fire catches onto it, that's going to be very early in the burning stage. Rabbi Yochanan Amar mishitatzis bo es ha'or berubo. No, Rabbi Yochanan says no. You got to have most of it burning. It's not just when some of it's burning, but all of it, but most of it's burning. So Amar le Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Bar Rav Yitzchak asperalach taima de Rabbi Yochanan. I'll tell you the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Kra, the Torah says in connection with the burning of Sodom and Amorah, v'hinei Allah kitor haaretz kitor akivshan. And again here it uses the language of kitor, of burning, which is the same language of the burning of the komets. And so it was smoking like the smoke of a furnace. And ein kivshan mala kitor ad tatzis haor berubo. You don't really get smoke out of a furnace until most of the fuel has been ignited. And so too here you would need to burn the majority of the komets would have to have burned part in order for it to work. Amar le Rabin bar Rav Adel Rava Amri Talmidayich Amar Rav Amram Tanya. We have a brisa that was taught by your students Rava, and doesn't this brisa seem to contradict Rabbi Yochanan, because ainli ella dvarim shedarkan likare b'layla. This is a brisa that is Rashi tells us is commenting on the pasuk al mizbeach kol halayla, that when it says that an ola it needs to be put on the mizbeach all night. So there are various things that get put on the mizbeach at night. Kigon Avarim, like the limbs, Ufdarim, and the fats, Shemalan Umaktiran, Miboa Shemesh. They get put on as soon as sunset comes. Umis aklin va'olchin kol kulo, and they can stay on the fire all night long. So then there are dvarim shedarkim likara bayom. There are some things that get brought during the daytime. And what are those? Kigom hakometz, a kometz. And that's the one that's relevant here because we're going to see that it's the kometz that needs to be brought during the daytime. And we're going to see when it could be brought. The halavona and the lavona, which is part of the carbon mincha as well. The hakatoris and the incense. Uminchas kohanim and the mincha of a kohen. And minchas kohen mashuach and the kohen gadol's mincha. Uminchas nesakim and the mincha that comes with the sacrifice. Along with the wine, Shemalan umaktirim mibo hashemesh, and they can be brought as soon as sunset. Well, that sounds odd because you just said that they were supposed to be brought during the daytime. So the Gemara interjects, "V'ha'amrat darkan likara biyom ella imbo." You said that they're supposed to be brought during the daytime. So why are you telling us that they only get brought after sunset? No, ella imbo hashemesh. No, you can bring them just before sunset. So in second, v'holken umis aklin v'holken kol laila, and then they continue to be burned all night long. So minayin, how do I know this? Talmud Lomar zos torasa ola riba. That this is the law of the ola that comes to include that other offerings also that are offered during the daytime can be burned at night, but the burning has to begin during the daytime. And so now the Gemara finishes its question. V'ha im ba shemesh. One second though, we said that you can bring it just before sunset. So lomash kachas lo shetatzis or barubo. But if you bring it just before sunset, it will not have burned most of it before sunset. And so as a result, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you need to have most of it burned before that in order to be able to eat the shirayim, you have a problem here because how can you burn it just before sunset? You won't have a majority of it burned before sunset. So lo kasha kan liklot kan lahatir. No, there's a different standard when it comes to being able to eat it and being permitting it to be eaten. So then you need a majority to be burned. But when it comes to bringing it up on the mizbeach, as long as it's burning a little bit before the sunset, so then that's going to be sufficient. So Rabbi Lazar Masnei Law Mibo Hashemesh. Rabbi Lazar said, no, don't change the language. Leave it as that you can burn the even the Levona, the Komets, and the Ketores, all of them, you can burn them even after sunset. Umokim la befokim. And you can say that the situation is where the korban flew off it burst off the altar, and now it's just talking about putting it back on. V'chein ki asa Rav Dimi, and similarly Rav Dimi taught when he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amar Rabbi Yanai befokin. He said in the name of Rabbi Yanai that it's talking about when it pops off the mizbeach and then bursts off the mizbeach and then you put it back on. But though, and second, Umimamar Rabbi Yanai Haki, do Rabbi Yanai really say this? V'hamar Rabbi Yanai Ketor shepaka mi al gebei mizbeach afilu kuratin sheba ein machzirinoso. But Osan. But when it comes to the incense, if the incense were to burst off the Mizbeach, Rabbi Yanai himself said that you don't put it back on the Mizbeach, even if you got solid particles that you could tell are from the incense. The Tani Rav Chanina, Bar Minyume, B'devei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Asher tochal ha'esh es ha'olah al ha'mizbeach, ikule ola atamachazir, v'i atamachazir ikule ketoris. That again, same basic teaching that you don't, because the Torah says that the fire is going to consume the ola of the altar, when it comes to an ola, you're going to put it back on. But the ketoris, you're not going to put back on. So, okay, you know what? Same mikan ketoris. So take ketoris out of that brisa, and then you could use the explanation that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Dimi and Rabbi Yanai all offered in connection with that brisa. Okay, we'll conclude now with three quick questions that are all unresolved. Amar Rabbi Asi, ki pashit Rabbi Elazar b'Menachos. When Rabbi Elazar was studying Menachos, boy hachi, he asked the following: Komets shesidro. What happens if you put the komets down on the altar, the cedar alav es hamaracha, and you put it in a way, you put it under the fire, instead of on top of the fire, right? Because it says al ha'esh. So the question is that going to be good? Mahu derech haktara b'kach o ein derech haktara b'kach? Is that the way you're supposed to burn it or not? Meaning, is that considered a way that you're supposed to burn it? Teku, it's unresolved. So by Chizkiah, a varin shesidron. What about if you don't do it with a but you do it with limbs. And again, you put the fire is on top of it. Mahu. Allah eitzin amar rachmana. Do we say that the korbanot have to be on the wood because the Torah uses that language of on the wood? Dafka al ha'etzim. Is that meant to be specific? Odilma keva deksiv kra achrina. There's another verse that says asher tochal ha'esh es ha'olah al hamizbech. It needs to be on the altar. Maybe that on the altar means literally touching the altar, and therefore it needs to be on the altar. So ibai haki, and therefore ibai haki avid, ibai haki avid. And so as a result, you can either focus on the altar and have it be touching the altar, and therefore the fire is above it, or you could put it on the wood and focus on the language of on the wood. And so as a result, you could do it in either way. Take again, we don't answer that. It's unresolved. By third and final one, by Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka asks, what happens if instead of under, you put it next to? So again, aliba demanda amar al mamish. Now, according to the one who says that on means on, and this reference to on is not back to al ha'etz that we were just talking about, even though that would have been what I would have thought, and that would really led me to be confused. But this is actually referring to a machlokus that we will see if we take a look at the top Rashi. It'll cite the daf tzadik vav amud aleph that we'll see this machlokus where we see the question of where do you put the incense in the spoons that are supposed to go with the lechem hapanim? Do they go? And it says al ha ma'areches. That's what the Torah says. So the question is, when the Torah says al ha ma'areches, does that mean literally on the pile, or does it mean next to? And that's a machlokas that we're going to see on Daf Tzadik Vav and Aleph. And so as a result, where if you're the rabbis who say that it literally means on over there by alama reches, well then, lo tibailach. Then it's not a question over here. Of course, al means al, and the al ha'etzim ksiv. It says on the wood, so it needs to be on the wood. It would not be a valid location to put it next to the wood. Ki tibailach. According to whom am I asking? Aliba demanda amar al besamach. When you have al in connection with the spoons of the Levona, if that al means next to, well, then I can ask you the question. So, hakinami al basamach, does this al ha'etzim also mean next to? O dilma al ha'etzim dumya da al hamizbeach. No, or maybe just as al hamizbeach certainly means on the altar and not next to the altar, so too al ha'etzim means on the wood and not next to the wood. So, mahasam al mamish, when it comes to the altar, it means all on literally. Abhakanami al mamish. Hoso to here, al could mean literally on. So teku, again, this is unresolved, and that brings us to the next Mishnah. And for that, you're going to have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. And I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
We said earlier that discussing the smoke, that it takes a while for that smoke to generate, right? Until
Correct.
most of the material is burned. Could be
That's
into the
correct.
night. But I remember now, maybe I didn't learn it correctly, but when the Kohen brings, I thought so, but the Kohen brings the Ketoret and the Gechalim into the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur, right?
Yes.
So he puts it down, and from what I remember, the room begins to generate smoke once he mixes the Ketoret and starts to burn the Ketoret. I thought it happens pretty soon.
So, I don't believe that it says there that it happens as soon as the first Ketores begins to burn. it's not,
It wasn't clear to me how fast it happened, but it said
yeah,
that there is
but
smoke, and then he has to
so
leave
I
the
don't
he
think that
leaves
it
the
has to
room.
be inconsistent. I mean, those two can be consistent with each other, just as one happens as all the amount of time to burn the majority of it. Remember, it's not a large amount. So these are not, even though we have these two different viewpoints, right? We have Rabbi Hanina who says as soon as it catches a little bit of fire, and Rabbi Yochanan who says it got to catch most of it. The difference in time could be a few seconds
Uh-huh.
because we're not talking about a lot of material, right? We're talking about there's even a question of whether it's an olive, 2 olives volume. It could be even less than 2 olives volume of material. This is not that we're, and so as a result, similarly in the Ketoris, in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, it could be talking about, and of course, it could be talking about a relatively small amount of material, so it would quickly start to smoke. The other thing to note in that context is that you're in an enclosed space. And so the idea that the smoke is rising and you're seeing the smoke and you need enough content to be smoking, that was a statement in connection with the burning of Sodom and Amorah, open space, big
Right.
space, and that's
So
the
there's wind. The
situation
wind blows
that
the smoke. You don't get any
exactly, and
oil.
that's what we're talking about when we're dealing with the outer altar. But it could be that when you're dealing with smoke inside, which is what you're dealing with into the Kodesh Kodashim, that it could be much faster, and that you don't need the same amount to burn because we're not talking about smoke that you're seeing from a global perspective. You're talking about smoke that you're seeing from a more local perspective, and we all know that something starts to smoke as soon as it starts to burn. But the point is that the comment that was made in connection with Sodom and Amorah was about seeing it in an outdoor setting. And so there, when you're looking at smoke out of a chimney, well, then you need to have a certain amount of fire that's already taken hold. But again, and that's going to be true when you're burning the comets on the outer altar. But when it comes to the burning of the incense on the inner altar, the smoke is going to start building up right away because you're talking about inside. So those are a couple of potential answers to the
Yeah.
question about that.
I was just thinking about the time factor but yeah, okay, there are many factors involved here. I was thinking about
Yep.
time, how long it would take, but there are other outside factors that can contribute to
Exactly.
this.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to highlight. All right, Yishikach, have a great Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.